Polish President Andrzej Duda's remarks in the Financial Times about nuclear sharing are making rounds in the media as Europe, over the past few days, has witnessed a series of defense and security meetings. But with all that talk about how to make Europe more self-reliant in the face of a seismic foreign diplomacy shifts in Europe, is Europe actually ready to implement those changes fast? What is the future of nuclear deterrence and EU defense in light of the threat from the East? Joining me now is Tomáš Nagy, Senior Research Fellow for Nuclear Space and Missile Defense at Globsec, who up until recently had been a diplomat at the permanent delegation of the Slovak Republic to NATO. Hello and welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. So, in an interview with the Financial Times, President Duda called upon the U.S. to place nuclear warheads in Poland, an offer that was never made to Poland in the first place. So, what's your opinion on this message and the timing of thereof?
Well, putting it into some certain historical context, this is not the first time that Poland has been vocally advocating for an increased role in NATO's nuclear sharing, and it's probably by slight margin, probably the most ambitious exclamation of Polish ambition to do more nuclear deterrence. But this is consistent with what we have been hearing from Poland, both publicly and behind closed doors. And it's also reflective of the security situation in Europe, because one of the direct implications of the war of Russia against Ukraine is that nuclear weapons matter, and nuclear deterrence is an integral part of the overall deterrence picture. And Poland wants to have a pretty sizable role within that overall deterrence picture. That we can see it in the way how Poland kind of reflects its current defense ambitions in military buildup, in how it wants to approach a whole of society approach, and obviously a nuclear component to all of this seems to be an integral part of Polish thinking.
So you mentioned the aspiration, but is it considering the shifting landscape, security landscape as well here in Europe, is it possible that such a scenario would take place?
Well, let me approach it this way. I think there's a number of ways how Poland can increase its contributions to NATO's nuclear deterrence mission. Obviously, it can do the same kind of things that it has been doing for the past couple of years, but in a more robust standing. So it can contribute greater conventional forces to nuclear operations, which is really, really an important element in nuclear operations thinking. Second thing it can do, it can certify some of its air assets and also crew and pilots. So SACEUR can use these Polish assets within the overall deterrence framework. And probably the most ambitious element that can happen is also having nuclear weapons on Polish soil. That would be the most ambitious step. Also the hardest step to implement, given the fact that it requires certain preparation. It comes with certain financial costs. Poland would need to train some of its air force and land forces to particularly handle this kind of situation. So it is really a huge ambition, and it's clear that at the political level, Poland is ready. But before that gets implemented, providing that the US agrees, which is the main criteria, and I would also say provided that the European allies would accept such a step, even that it would take a couple of years to implement.
So we spoke about the ambition, but let's look at the whole issue from a different perspective. Considering Russia placed its nukes in Belarus, shouldn't this be a natural development for the US to want to have the nuclear warheads in Poland? The times are changing and old solutions might not pass the test as of now.
Yes. Well, there has been over the past couple of years a process within NATO that looks at whether the current posture is fit for purpose, or whether the current doctrine is fit for purpose. So there are changes happening within the alliance, and this can be an integral part of it. It's not just about placing the weapons in a particular place. It's about, as I said and indicated in my previous answer, it's about having a sufficient conventional capability to back up those nuclear forces, is to have maybe a new approach to nuclear planning, so you can address the whole range of situations that are relevant for nuclear security, and it's about, as I've said, about burden sharing. And, NATO allies in greater numbers should come in and should contribute to the deterrence mission. I think for Poland to succeed with its request to have the nuclear weapons on its soil, NATO would need to do a thorough analysis what would be the military benefits of it. And if there is a clear understanding that this would be more beneficial than risky, that could really change things within NATO. But I don't think we are there at the current point.
Considering a series of meetings and talks that took place over the last few days and weeks, we know that France is actually willing to extend its nuclear umbrella to its EU fellows. And how likely is this to be enough to protect Europe?
Well, what we are seeing currently is the way how Europe wants to absorb the shockwave that is emanating from the Trump presidency. So the first 50 days have been really robust posturing on the US side, sometimes perceived as being at the expense of Europe. And obviously that has also hit some nuclear chords. And France has reacted with its initial push to start a discussion that would ensure that European allies wouldn't be without a nuclear umbrella, a nuclear deterrent protection under any situation, even a worst case situation when the US would ultimately decide to stop provide Europe this kind of deterrent, which we are not at that point currently. And hopefully we will never get there. But even if that happens, there are options for Europe to consider, and France is certainly in a position, probably the most natural position to step in, given the fact that it has slightly more diversified nuclear forces than UK. Some of its assets could use the US model of being forward deployed to allied countries. We have seen that France has already started to shift in its declaratory policy and talk about the European dimension more robustly. I don't think that's enough. If that is to ever happen, we would need to probably have a more in-depth discussion how European allies can help France to widen its stockpile of nuclear weapons, and also how to find foreseeable, executable arrangements to have these assets on European soil. A new consultation mechanism would need to be developed. Probably France would need to include the European allies into the planning process for it to be credible, because credibility with nuclear deterrence is a key factor. So that would be probably a generational thing to think through how that could be implemented. We are not there yet. I sometimes call this as a plan B, but before we get to plan B, we need to make sure that we are doing as much as we can to implement plan A, which is the best plan that we have currently, and it's based on the forward deployed US nuclear forces in Europe.
And last but not least, I wanted to touch upon the Rearm Europe program. Where would the money come from, and what are the main concerns for this sort of a plan to rearm Europe, in your opinion?
Well, ultimately, as I perceive it, the responsibility rests with member states. Even the accumulation of financial resources would need to be centered at the member states level. Member states would be making decisions of what to acquire in what kind of sequences. So I think there is a broad understanding what Europe needs to build, but obviously sequencing is a really important element. How you decide what's going to be the priorities in a moment where sort of everything seems to be a priority. And there's a good step in some of the European Commission language, good signs that sort of the lessons learned from the war in Ukraine seems to be sinking into the thinking in Brussels. So there's great emphasis on integrated air and missile defense capabilities being prioritized, critical ammunition being prioritized, long-range fires, so offensive missile capabilities being in there. Those are really, really important elements. So it's it's a promising set of promising signs that I see at EU level, but we have seen so many ambitions over the past couple of years and decades, and sometimes the vision and the ambition goes much further than the actual execution. So this is where I would be paying most of the attention, whether we are seeing that ambition being materialized into the concrete steps and rather quickly. I think that's the crucial element in the whole ambition.
Definitely, the timeline is of essence here. Tomáš Nagy, Senior Research Fellow for Nuclear, Space and Missile Defense at Globsec. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
And so this would be all for now here on World News Tonight, but please do stay tuned. We're back in just a moment here on TVP World with more news and features, and I'll see you there.